With the future of the Justice Department on the line, let's bring in MS Now senior congressional reporter and way too early host, Ali Vitale, former DOJ pardon attorney Liz Oyer, who testified against Blanche's nomination. And here with me in studio, MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin. It is good to see you all. Liz, you previously testified that Blanche is a, quote, casual liar. So when you consider his written responses about the anti-weaponization fund, do you take him at his word?
No, we are well past the point of taking Todd Blanche at his word on anything. He has made misrepresentations to members of Congress before, including on this very subject. A federal court found last week that Blanche made misrepresentations when he appeared before the Senate Appropriations Committee about the status of the settlement fund that he signed. This is just basic Contract Law 101. The settlement fund is not dead. There's a contract in place that says that Donald Trump has the right to enforce it. And everything that Todd Blanche is saying to suggest that it's dead really just relies on Trump not choosing to exercise that right. There is no reason to believe that he won't.
Lisa, I respect message discipline as much as the next person. There was a lot of language in the written answers here that mirrored what Blanche said under oath at 2 hearings. Let's take a listen and then we'll talk about it.
We are not moving forward with the fund, period. I'm not sure what that means to sign documents reversing. There's nothing to reverse. We're not moving forward with the fund. I'm not committing to doing anything in writing. No.
Okay.
I mean, I'll take it under advisement.
I believe you have said that the weaponization fund is a moot issue. Is that your position?
Yes, it is a moot issue, meaning there is no weaponization fund. The weaponization fund is dead. It's not moving forward. I'm under oath today, and I've said it's dead repeatedly. I said it to the House Oversight Committee, and I'm happy to say it as many times as necessary.
Okay, Lisa, and yet when Senator Tillis asked in writing, if the president directs you to reverse your decision and move forward with the fund, will you move forward? Blanche's response was, it would be inappropriate for me to comment on hypothetical communications I may or may not have with the president. Is he giving himself wiggle room here?
Absolutely. And to Liz's point, Trump has the right to enforce that contract. That was something that Senator Cornyn was drilling down on. Senator Cornyn himself, a lawyer, really trying to understand, hey, wait a second, this is a contractual document. You're telling me that it's dead, but there are people who have a right to enforce this contract. But Alicia, even if he didn't give himself wiggle room there, I want to point to another piece of his responses that does give himself related wiggle room. And that's because multiple January 6 defendants have filed claims under the Federal Tort Claims Act. That would allow them to recover money from the federal government for their time in jail, for the process that they went through, independent of whether or not there is a weaponization fund. And so I want to read to you what he said. He was asked by Senator Durbin, will you issue a memorandum directing DOJ not to enter into any settlement that would result in paying money or issuing an apology to any person convicted of assaulting law enforcement officers during the January 6th attack on the Capitol? Seems like a simple, yes, I will commit to that, but yet Todd Blanche's response, every claim submitted pursuant to the Federal Tort Claims Act is reviewed on the merits and addressed by the torts branch of the Civil Division. The compromise and or settlement of any claim is made only in the best interests of the United States. He goes on to say that to the best of his knowledge, no settlement has been made under the FTCA, the Federal Tort Claims Act, with any January 6th defendant, but he's not committing that the department won't ever reach such a thing. So separate and apart from the anti-weaponization fund, there is a vehicle for compensating these people, and Todd Blanche won't say in writing that he won't use it.
Liz, Cornyn has said trying to change the IRS settlement through legislation would be problematic. But you still have Tillis open to the idea. He said, I have to be convinced that there is no way that it could actually ever be resurrected again, which is exactly why I talked about the legislation that Blanche offered to help write the technical language for. Why offer to draft the quote unquote technical language for legislation rather than simply have Trump agree in writing to delete the fund?
Why this cannot be put in writing really eludes me. There is no reason not to put it in writing, which would be the simplest solution, other than the fact that they don't really intend to kill it. I think legislation is problematic because I've thought about this and I'm not really sure that you actually can write a law that invalidates a private contract. That is an agreement that is now enforceable by Donald Trump and his sons. And it's possible that Congress could pass legislation that says that the money piece of it cannot be appropriated. There can be no money spent on this. But the other part of the settlement, which I think is even more problematic, is this release of all claims. The United States has agreed to release all claims against Donald Trump, his sons, their businesses. They can't be audited or investigated. And that's not something that legislation can really necessarily fix. So we're in a real difficult situation here as far as Blanche's commitments on this issue.
It's why, Ali, I find this back and forth over the possibility of drafting legislation to be so interesting, because you can almost feel Senators Cornyn and Tillis trying. They are trying to get to yes on Blanche. What has been the response on Capitol Hill to these written responses?
You know who else is trying is Blanche, because apparently behind the scenes, he was telling people like Senator Dick Durbin, yeah, I support Congress legislating around this issue of the fund. And Liz is right that they can't touch the piece around the IRS settlement part, but it's why what a judge previously said a few weeks ago is so important when it comes to that basically Trump can't refer to that settlement in future legal proceedings. But on the fund itself, Congress does still control the power of the purse. And so they could write legislation that basically says DOJ can't access this fund, however dead or moot Todd Blanche says it is. And this is something where I remember Senator Durbin saying to me, yeah, Todd Blanche said it to me, but I don't really get why I, as a member of Congress, would have to do something in Congress to kill the thing that you created over at DOJ. And so it is a bit of a circular firing squad on that front. I think all of it lends to the question that you asked, which is that, yes, it's clear that Tillis and Cornyn are trying to get to yes. In Tillis's part, I think he has said publicly, even before the confirmation hearing, that he's predisposed to be a yes for Blanche. He wanted more clarity around things like the fund. You can even see in other parts of this question and answer that he asks about January 6th and if it's illegal or something that DOJ should prosecute to assault police officers. And Blanche writes, it's a serious crime and my DOJ will prosecute. Of course, his DOJ is not being asked to prosecute what Biden's DOJ was asked to prosecute around January 6th, an insurrectionist. And then those pardons land directly in the lap of our colleague here, Liz Oyer, right, who can explain what the process was when Trump came in and gave those sweeping pardons in the first place. But I think when it comes to Cornyn, he's really the one that I'm looking at more closely on this. And all it takes is one at Senate Judiciary right now until and unless they fill the Graham vacancy on that committee. And it's why Politico's reporting is so instructive, that they're doing this work behind the scenes to try to get someone like John Cornyn on board. He has really kept his powder dry publicly, saying that he's still deciding. But I think he's really the person to watch in this scenario.
Right, especially since, Lisa, part of the rationale that Tillis originally gave, or the condition he set, was that Blanche had to meet with Epstein survivors. Blanche then meets with those Epstein survivors. The survivors' readout of the meeting is that it was not satisfactory at all. In fact, we had Danny Bensky on yesterday. She said her message to Tillis was, do not vote to confirm. They are now out with a letter. What is it the survivors are saying?
Well, first of all, the survivors are sort of underscoring or encapsulating some of our reporting, what Danny also told you about that meeting. And they say, we write to you as survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's sex trafficking operation to urge you to vote no on Todd Blanche's confirmation. And then they begin to detail the meeting, Alicia. Blanche showed no remorse for the horrific release of materials that exposed survivors' identities and images. He also gave no indication that he believed there were investigative leads worth pursuing. And then they go on to address Tillis directly, because it's Tillis who really has made an issue of the Epstein files. Senator Tillis, when you urged Todd Blanche to meet with survivors, we believed you expected a serious and meaningful conversation. What occurred instead was a box-checking exercise arranged only after his confirmation was put at risk. They want to basically say to Tillis, it's not enough that he got in the room with us. Maybe he thinks that condition was fulfilled. We need you to now stand up with us and tell him that simply getting in a room with us and gaslighting and deflecting us doesn't constitute the meeting that you expected to occur for your vote.
Ali Vitale, right now, the conversation we're having is about moving this nomination out of committee. It still, of course, has to go through the full Senate. Your sense, which of these issues is stickiest once it gets to the full body?
I think all of them, frankly, but probably the anti-weaponization fund, just because if you go back a few weeks to the last vote-a-rama that they had, which was just a series of votes on the Senate floor to do a procedural mechanism around reconciliation, there were a few forced votes here on the anti-weaponization fund that had some interesting Republicans voting for them because of midterm politics and at-home politics at play. None of those amendments or during that vote-a-rama actually passed, and there were a few different ways that senators tried to have messaging votes around this anti-weaponization fund. For various reasons, they didn't pass by the sufficient margins that would have been needed, but I think this remains one of the most difficult and complex issues that has been referred to me by Republicans on the Hill as an own goal from the administration. There's been a few instances of that, but certainly this is one with the most staying power, and I think that for Todd Blanche to come forward and try to say, well, an AG would have to exercise use of the fund, and I'm telling you it's dead. Okay, maybe that does actually apply to Attorney General Todd Blanche if and when he is confirmed. But there will be other AGs potentially after Blanche, and I think that's in part why lawmakers want to close this off so fully.